On today's episode of the Harrison Vapnek Podcast, we're going to bring on Jim Ayello, Colts insider from the IndyStar. Going to talk all things Indianapolis Colts, from the Carson Wentz trade to what the implications of that trade is, to what the future is with Jacoby Brissett, to if the Colts championship window is just opening or if it's starting to close. So a lot of Colts talk. Also talk to Jim about some of his experiences covering IndyCar and the Indy 500. Also some of his experiences at the University of Missouri. So a really good podcast. Tune in for a lot of Colts talk. A lot of fun with Jim Ayello starting right now. I'm now joined by the Colts insider from the IndyStar, the co-host of the Colts Cover 2 podcast, and most importantly, probably a Mizzou Tigers alum, Jim Ayello from the IndyStar. Jim, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on this. I'm excited.
Well, so we have plenty to talk about. We'll talk about your career, but I think we got to talk about with some pretty big news in Indianapolis the last couple of weeks. Carson Wentz traded from the Philadelphia Eagles to the Colts for a third-round pick and a second-round pick that could turn into a first-round pick. Give me your initial thoughts on on what the trade happened and when it happened.
So my initial thoughts were, I guess I just assessed risk. That's the part that kind of jumped out to me was, okay, what did they give up for this guy who had such a bad 2020 season, but has, shown some talent in the past and potentially he was an MVP candidate in 2017. So the first thing that jumped out to me was, did they give up too much or was the risk worth, or was it worth rolling the dice? And to me, it ended up being, yes, that was the answer to me. Was they gave up a third round pick this year, which I don't think is very much. Chris Ballard, the general manager of the Colts, loves to trade back. He's got the 21st pick in the draft. I feel like if he wants to trade back to 28, 29, 30, he can get that third round pick back and you can kind of eliminate, still make a first round pick and then eliminate what you gave up in the mid round. And then next year, it's that conditional thing. So it's a second round pick or a first round pick if Carson Wentz plays 70% of the snaps and they make the playoffs, or just 75% of the offensive snaps in general. Well, to me, that's great for the Colts. Is if he does exceed those things, that means things are going pretty well. And they probably made the playoffs and they're everything they had hoped Carson Wentz would be, he is. And if it's not, they can determine in the second half of the season, okay, this isn't working. Let's pull back on the Carson Wentz experiment and make sure we don't hit those qualifications. Make sure we trade only a second round pick. And that doesn't become a very big hit. And then cap wise, they're only committed to $15 million next year. They can get out with $15 million cap hit, which is not great, but also not too bad. So to me, I thought, okay, Frank Reich and Carson Wentz have this history. They love each other. Like some of the sources that I had within the Colts ecstatic about pairing Carson Wentz with Frank Reich. And then when I reached out to some sources close to Carson Wentz, this was the thing he was hoping for. Once he knew that the Eagles part of his life was over, he wanted to come join Frank Reich in Indianapolis. This is how he hoped it would end. So they both get what they want. And so that's a great thing. So if it works out, it's a great deal for the Colts. And if it doesn't work out, I don't feel like they're putting themselves too far behind the eight ball that they can't bounce back next year and try this whole thing again. So in the end, I liked the trade for the Colts after having, a few minutes to think about it.
So you mentioned it's not a crazy risk.
Mm-hmm.
It could, if it doesn't work out, it's probably a second and a third round pick. But going deeper into it, why did the Colts make this move instead of rather having a one-year experiment at quarterback like they did with Phillip Rivers and they made the playoffs? And does Frank Reich and that organization think they can revive Carson Wentz's career?
So the answer to the first question is, and it's two words, and it's going to be the answer. The Colts have a quarterback question for the rest of the next 5-10 years. If they do, the answer is always going to be Andrew Luck. The reason they're in this predicament, the reason that they went from Jacoby Brissett to Phillip Rivers now to Carson Wentz is because Andrew Luck retired. Andrew Luck decided that he didn't want football to be part of his life anymore. All respect to him for making that decision, but there's no doubt in my mind or anybody's mind that put the Colts in a huge bind. They thought they had their franchise quarterback at under 30, paid, all those things locked up. They were building around him, and then he walked away, and that surprised them. They didn't know that was coming. So the reason they're having to take a shot at a guy like Carson Wentz, who's coming off one of the worst quarterback years in recent memory. I mean, he was just abysmal last year. They have to take a risk on a guy like that is because they didn't have Andrew Luck and they can't build around him. And then they actually did think that they were going to get 2 years out of Phillip Rivers. And then Phillip Rivers decided, you know what, call it a career after 1 year in Indianapolis, a really, really good year. I think the Colts were happy with what they did, but he ended up being a stopgap, which is, again, what we thought. We just thought it would be a little bit longer stopgap. Then they get to Carson Wentz. And I think, again, they're excited because, yes, to answer your second question, they do think that Frank Reich can revive Carson Wentz, or at least get him back to what he was in maybe 2019, if not 2017, where he was an MVP candidate. But the guy is, athletically as gifted as you could ask for. He's huge. He can move. He's got a huge arm. He can be accurate, even though accuracy was a big part of his problem. I think his mechanics got a lot of whack last year. He was on the run a lot because his offensive line just deteriorated in front of him. They both kind of lost some talent and then had a lot of injuries to deal with. He also didn't have great weapons in Philadelphia. If it sounds like I'm making excuses, I kind of am. He had a bad year. He had a bad year, and there are some reasons for that belong to him and some reasons that belong to the Eagles. And so there are some concerning things. Like, I don't love, there was a report I think Adam Schefter had that he didn't talk to Doug Peterson for the last 8-9 weeks of their relationship. That's concerning because Doug Peterson and Frank Reich are friends. They've known each other. They worked together in Philadelphia. They won a championship together. So what happened to that relationship that caused that crack in the foundation for them? And again, that's not something I know the answer to. And I'm anxious to we're digging in. We're talking to as many people as we can about Carson Wentz and what happened in Philadelphia. But it's one of those things where, again, we don't know exactly where that ended. So anyway, I do think that they're optimistic about being able to bring him back to the levels that he was at. And that's the reason why the Colts rolled the dice on Wentz.
Yeah, the level you were at, you just mentioned, the 2017 season started 13 games. They went 11-2, threw for 3,200 yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 picks. The year after, he only played 11 games. He was 5-6, 21 touchdowns, 7 picks. 2019, quietly a pretty good year, 4,000 yards. The only career 4,000 yard season he has, 27 touchdowns, 7 picks. But last year is where it went off the rails in 12 starts. He won 3 games, 16 touchdowns, 15 picks, 2,600 yards. Were you hearing anyone else's name floated around? I don't think anyone knows the Colts probably as well as you, that they were possibly going to trade for if they didn't make the Wentz move. Another quarterback that possibly was in the talks that the Colts could acquire.
So they were definitely in on Matthew Stafford. I don't know that they ever made again, the difference between, and it's a fun line to walk at this point in the NFL is did they make a formal offer or were they just asking about the guy and were they discussing the details of the trade? And again, there's some things that we know and we don't. We know that they were talking about Matthew Stafford. Whether or not they made a formal offer, don't know. I don't think they did, but I do think that they were in on the Matthew Stafford trade. And then the Rams came in with kind of a Godfather offer, you'd say. I mean, they got their 2 first-round picks. They got to dump Jared Goff, that contract. So they're pretty excited about that deal, and the Lions had to take it. So there was that. And then again, they did their due diligence. I'll say that. I know they called on Derek Carr in Las Vegas, and they were pretty much told he's not available. And again, everybody's available to a degree, but essentially he's not available for a reasonable price. You'd have to go way beyond, whatever is crazy. So that I think they didn't want to do that. But I will say this, Frank Reich, one of the things about him that makes him unique, that makes him the coach that he is that he believes. I mean, at this point, I haven't met or came across any player that he doesn't think is salvageable or is that he can't fix or save in a way. I guess that's maybe a bad way of putting it, but he believes in these guys far beyond where most people do. And I think that for that reason, he had worked with Carson Wentz before. He had said, I've seen the talent. I've seen what he can do. We have a good relationship. So I think he was higher up on the Colts list than maybe some people would expect. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't, I don't think Deshaun Watson, first of all, was realistically available to the Colts. I mean, I don't think the Texans were going to trade inside the division. I don't even know if they're going to trade him, but I don't think that was a realistic option. Same with Russell Wilson, same with Aaron Rodgers. Some of these other guys that have been thrown out there, I don't think they were realistic options. So I think what the Colts said was, okay, Frank, who's the guy that you think is 1, attainable, and 2, that you think you can get good quarterback play out of? And for what we talked about at the beginning, a relatively cheap price. And I think Carson Wentz was pretty high up on that list. Like I said, they did their due diligence. They kicked the tires on some other guys. But ultimately, I think Wentz was, I don't know if he was option A, but I don't think he was G either. I think he was pretty high up on that list.
Yeah, and you mentioned they did the due diligence on Watson and Derek Carr, who I didn't even realize was available. But I guess everyone's available. We've already seen the Stafford Goff trade. There are rumors that Kirk Cousins available. Dak Prescott's a free agent. Yeah. Now that the Wentz domino was really the first kind of big one to fall since the Stafford trade, what do you think falls next? Because now this time, franchise tag started this past week. Now we're weeks away from free agency. What is the next domino to follow, you think?
In the NFL, I think it's Dak. I think Dak Prescott, that's going to get worked out one way or the other. I mean, my guess is that the Cowboys figure something out. I mean, you'd have to think a sane franchise would try to figure out a way to work out something with Dak Prescott. They have that second-year franchise tag they can use on him. I know they don't want to because I think that comes at a price of $38 million against the cap this year. That's a huge number. It makes it hard to be competitive around him. So I think they want to try to work out an extension with him. As Jerry Jones has said, Dak couldn't have any more levers than he has now. They saw the way the season kind of fell apart around them once Dak got hurt. So I think that's the next domino, and people will go, okay, that's off the table. There has been some rumors about Derek Carr being extended in Las Vegas and taking that off the table. I haven't been able to confirm that. I've been working on it, but it's one of those things that you haven't been able to confirm. But if that happens, again, you take another guy off the table. And then I think, honestly, again, it's a smaller domino, but I think Marcus Mariota might find a new home. He was the backup in Las Vegas this year. He made he played one game, played really well. People were really impressed. I think there's going to be a team, maybe it's Chicago, maybe it's New England, that kind of takes the spin at Marcus Mariota and hopes that maybe he can, and it's funny to use this example, maybe he can have that Ryan Tannehill second life of his career. Obviously, funny because Tannehill was the one who replaced Mariota in Tennessee. But he played well. Maybe in the right system, he can do something similar again. But I think, the Dak contract will get worked out in Dallas, and I think Mariota might get traded. Again, don't know who. New England and Chicago are my two best guesses.
I think Mariota in New England makes sense. I think he could be a Cam type guy there, but with a more accurate arm. Maybe not the running ability of Cam, but I think Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels can make that work in that offense. Everyone has an Andrew Luck story that kind of involved with the Colts from that August 23rd night in Indianapolis. Where were you? Your thoughts? Were you hearing anything before? Take me through that entire evening for you.
No, I don't think anybody was hearing anything before. From what we, again, we've learned some of these things after the fact, but the Colts only really knew about a week before it happened. They were trying to keep it quiet as long as they could. There was some within the building that thought that was a bad idea because that kind of secret doesn't stay a secret for that long. But it obviously it does get out, and Schefter reports it. And again, all credit to Adam Schefter for that. That is an insane breaking story that he had. So that night, it's funny enough, like they're playing the Bears, I'm from Chicago, so I grew up a Bears fan. So that was kind of an interest. It was a preseason game, but I was excited to watch some of the guys that I had grown up watching, or, Mitch Trubisky was there. Just, again, a team I had watched a lot. I was excited. Colts Bears would be interesting to see what happens. But the thing that I got there really early because the week before in the preseason game, Andrew Luck had made an appearance like 4 or 5 hours before the game to do a workout on the field. And that was like the first time anyone had seen Andrew Luck in a long time. Like we didn't know where he was and they weren't talking much about him. He's getting better. I had only started on the job, I think it was like 3 weeks before he retired. So that was the fact that was that's a whole separate thing, but the whirlwind of starting the Colts job while Andrew Luck is retiring is nuts. But one of the first things I did as a Colts beat reporter was they found out, they revealed, Jim Irsay on a radio show revealed that he had this weird bone in his ankle called an osteogonum that only I can't remember the numbers. It's like 1 in 10 people have. It's something funky like that. It's again, he had this bone that no one else has. And there was something wrong with that. And it turned out that wasn't true. That's what they thought it was for a minute. Then it wasn't true. But I did this whole big story on what the heck an osteogonum is and who's dealt with these injuries before. And it was kind of wild. So anyway, so he was working out at one of the preseason games before, and we had missed it. Because we didn't, we get there a few hours before the game. He came out way earlier. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna get there as early as I can at the Bears game to make sure if he works out, I see it and I can give some sort of evaluation of what I saw. Didn't end up working out. At least not that I saw. And so we were like, okay, well, we'll see what happens with Andrew Luck, going forward, because this is week 3 of the preseason, only one more week before the season starts. And I can't remember when in the game it was. I'm pretty sure it was before halftime, but I can't remember specifically.
I think it was before halftime too.
Yeah. Where Adam Schefter tweeted the news, and I was sitting next to Joel, who I referenced earlier, this guy who covers the Colts with me. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I don't know if you allow swearing on this podcast, but that's what happened. Go ahead. Well, I was just like, holy shit, is this real? What is going on? And you do the thing on Twitter where you check to make sure the account is a legitimate account because you just assume it's a fake. And I'm showing it to Joel and he's stunned. My editor's there. His name's Nat. And I was like, what do we even do with this? I was already right. I had written at that point, I was writing a preseason store or a gamer, just a normal gamer. And I was like, we got to throw this away, I assume. He's like, yeah, get rid of that. So we go running over to the Colts media guy. It's me, the guy from The Athletic who used to work at the IndyStar's, Stephen Holder, and a couple other people go running over to the Colts media guy. And we're like, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? What is going on? And he just said, we'll have something for you in a little bit. And that was like pretty much all the confirmation we needed. Was it's not, he didn't flatly deny that Andrew Luck was retiring. So that was such a bold thing. We were like, okay, he would have denied it if it was not true. So there's something to this. And so, yeah, then it just became like, what is going to happen that night? And eventually it ended up being that Andrew Luck was going to have an impromptu press conference after the game at it was a night game. So it was like 10:30 or 11 o'clock. And it was just, it's hard to even remember. I remember people talking about, okay, the Colts they're screwed. They're going to go 2-14. Like they're done with this. And there was no way to prepare yourself for what was about to come. And sitting in a press conference, which by the way is a weird thought thinking with COVID, I haven't sat in a press conference in a long time. But we're sitting in there and there's the owners, Jim Irsay, Chris Ballard and Frank Reich have tears coming down their faces. Andrew Luck's crying and you're just like, what is going on right now? And then he finally gives this kind of like this speech he had been working on all week. We find out later, he'd been kind of working on this, like what he was going to say to the media. The idea was to give, I think, a Saturday morning press conference. And he had been working on the speech all week and he kind of had to give it impromptu. And it was good. Andrew Luck's a great speaker and all that stuff, but it was just a crazy, crazy night. And so, yeah, my gut reaction was, what is happening? There's not been anything like that. I don't think any in the history of sports, at least that I can remember, where a guy 28, 29 years old, one of the best at his position, retires in the middle of a game. I can't remember any other story like that.
Because it's crazy how good he was in 2018. It was the other Colts started. It was 1-5. They basically ran the table. It was a 10-6, 11-5, won a playoff game in Houston, lost a close game in Kansas City. It's crazy. You were 5 hours before you were trying to get him watch a warm up, and 5 hours later you're watching him give a retirement press conference. That evening I was in Orlando for the college football opening night game between Miami and the University of Florida. Florida was ranked in the top 10.
That's right.
I'm originally from South Florida, so we drove up to watch the Canes play and probably upset a top 10 team, except they didn't show up in the second half. And it was some point in a timeout, under 2 minutes left in the first half. And where I can't exaggerate this any less, everyone in the stadium got the notification on the phone at the same exact time. And everyone's reaction was, because this was during a timeout also, it wasn't during game action. Everyone just looks at their phone and is like, oh my God, is this real? And it's like,
yeah.
But it's like 60,000 people all with the same reaction. It's just like, it's not like I was in a group of 10 people. This is 60,000 people, all the same facial reactions. And you hit the nail right on the head. It's the most shocking retirement in sports, and not even mine, but your lifetime, and just something that nobody saw coming.
It was, again, it's hard to describe. And again, the media room, because it's all the way up in the top, the very top floor of Lucas Oil Stadium. And it was just pandemonium. People were running around trying to figure out if it was real, trying to figure out what's going on. And I'm glad you remember, because actually Stephen Holder, like I said, he went to Miami. So we were all joking. He was more watching that game on TV than he was watching this preseason game. Because no one, it's preseason. No one really cares. Yeah. And so he's watching that game. We're all kind of going back and forth talking about it. And then the bombshell drops. And again, I can say this with complete honesty. And again, maybe it's a fault of a beat writer, but there wasn't a beat writer who thought, me or anybody else who thought at any inkling this was coming, any inkling. We did not think he was going to retire. We knew, okay, there's something about this injury that's weird and they can't quite get their finger on it. And this might extend into the season. We knew things were not going the way the Colts had hoped regarding this injury. I don't think anyone thought he was ready to just hang it up. And then you hear him talk, and you talk about the cycle of pain and rehab and just taking the fun away from football, from the game that he loved. And then you thought, okay, well, good. Again, it stinks for the Colts, it stinks for the fans who booed him mercilessly as he left the field. And again, I think
that was interesting.
That was, you know what, visceral reaction. Like I said, at the time, listen, I'll say this. It was a bad idea. Booing him was stupid. They shouldn't have done it. But visceral reaction right before the season, they hear this guy quit on him. I kind of get where it came from. I think most of them probably regret it now, having heard him talk about the pain he was going through and why not. But and again, he does set the franchise back years. I get that. I just also, this is a human person who was going through an enormous amount of pain, both emotionally and physically, and he made a decision to make his life a happier one. And you can't fault the guy for that.
I know Schefter is obviously Schefter, but how did he get that information before any of the local guys?
That's a question. I'll tell you this. We don't, again, to this day, we don't know who the source was on that.
Wow.
I've talked to the Colts about it. They don't know. They want to know who the source was on it. They don't know who leaked it. And at least as far, again, this is the last time I asked was months ago, just to say, did you guys ever find out like how this came out before you were ready? But I think about, again, if I had guesses, again, I shouldn't, because it's a bad idea to do that. But he has, he's very well connected within the agency world. He's very well connected with, but like I said, like some of the higher up agencies. And if Andrew Luck's agent, who's also his uncle, had mentioned it to somebody at a different, within the agency or something like that, maybe it got around a little bit that way. Again, though, if you're Adam Schefter, you have to have this like cold. Like, I mean, you can't report that unless you know exactly. I mean, to me, I wouldn't report that unless I had it from Luck himself, Ballard, Reich, Jim Irsay. And, again, just one of those guys saying, yes, this is happening. Because that's pretty much all anybody like. And then the media guy, Matt Conti, he's a great PR guy for the Colts. They knew about it. I will say this too. They also Andrew Luck also started telling teammates throughout the week, just like one at a time. So again, if one of the agents told one of the players told one of their agents, that might have been how it kind of got out a little bit. We don't know. And to your point, like one of those things where Adam Schefter, again, incredibly good at his job, all credit to him. Yes, I would love to have gotten that breaking story myself. Would have been like a career making move, but no, just all credit to him, because that was an incredible, I think today, I think if you asked him to this day, that's probably his biggest breaking story, probably of his life.
Could be one of the biggest breaking stories in all of sports in the last, since I guess LeBron left Miami.
Yeah.
The 2 weeks after Luck retires, it's not like the Colts were a complete shambles. They had a backup, Jacoby Brissett, as a Patriots fan, forever a legend. The one big start against Houston on a Thursday night where he ran for however many yards and a touchdown. The last couple of years, he's been the backup to Phil, and he was the starter the year before that.
Right.
What is the future for Jacoby Brissett? He's still under contract, I believe, for this season, and possibly also, he's
a free agent now. Yep.
Okay, so are the Colts thinking about bringing Jacoby back?
So the thing about Jacoby Brissett is, and I give him credit for it, is that he believes he's a starter. He believes he's an NFL caliber starting quarterback. And the Colts have said that. They believe that too. They believe, they've said top 20 quarterback, but they brought in Carson Wentz. He's going to be the starting quarterback. I think Brissett is going to test his market to see, hey, does anybody want to give me a chance either to start or compete for a starting job? That's not going to happen in Indianapolis now. If Carson Wentz is the starter, there's not going to be any competition. Jacob Eason they like, but he's going to be either the backup or the third string, depending on what they do. So, no, I think Brissett is going to end up going somewhere else. I don't know where. I mean, again, we talk about New England. New England has a quarterback vacancy. That would make a lot of sense to me, is if they trade for Mariota and maybe bring in a guy like Brissett, and then you have these two options. And again, but he's a high quality backup. He's just a hugely popular guy inside the locker room. His coaches, his players, the front office, they all love him. So I think he'll land on his feet. I think he'll probably land somewhere where he does have a legitimate chance to compete for a starting job, but I don't think that's going to be in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I think all of Brissett's teammates always had great things about him. You mentioned even still after the Wentz trade, they still have a lot of free agent money to use.
Yeah.
This is now going into year 4 of the Reich and Ballard regime. It's been one playoff win. It's been a combined, I think, 28 wins. I know the Luck retirement set them back a little bit, but there's some urgency to start to win now. You made the trade last year for DeForest Buckner. You went all in on Carson Wentz. You used a premier pick on a running back, Jonathan Taylor, last year. You bring in these skill players like Michael Pittman you drafted. Zach Pascal is starting to get better. Is there an urgency to start to win now?
That's a great question. And I think, so Chris Ballard answered it this way, that he doesn't think that their Super Bowl window is like it's now. He thinks it's just starting to open. I think you can debate that. And I think, okay, so here's the thing about Chris Ballard. He believes in building in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. That's where he's going to spend his money and his draft capital. And then once he thinks he's got that done, he'll start spreading on the edges. And as you mentioned, he drafted a receiver in Pittman. He drafted a running back in Jonathan Taylor, right? He did some of the other things that you're like, oh, he thinks he might be done in the trenches and is starting to go out and get those skill position players that he can kind of push him over the top. So I do think that they think that they're right in that Super Bowl contention window. It's opening now. Here's the other thing too. The Andrew Luck retirement came at a really bad time for the Colts in that Chris Ballard had nailed a couple of drafts in ways that most GMs hadn't, like the Darius Leonard, Quentin Nelson, Braden Smith draft, incredible draft. But right now, like that's that. And again, you had all those guys on 4 years of cheap rookie deals and you're getting elite play from them. Well, Darius Leonard's entering his 4th year. Braden Smith's entering his 4th year. Quentin Nelson's entering his 4th year. They're all eligible for extensions now. They're all going to have to get paid. If you, again, assuming you're going to want to keep them around, and I think the Colts will. So to me, it's, that Super Bowl window is actually open, and that you got these guys on cheap deals. You got to take advantage of it, because once you start paying them, and now you're paying Carson Wentz and you're paying DeForest Buckner, and you got, again, Ryan Kelly is a huge, making over $10 million a year. Grover Stewart's making over $10 million a year. Buckner's making close to $20 million a year. Like, that money's going to go away soon. You're not going to have cheap contracts to deal with. You're going to have to win right away. So I do think that the Carson Wentz trade is definitely one of those, okay, we're in position to win right now. And I actually just wrote a story about this. I think it posted today on IndyStar.com. They're not, to call them Super Bowl contenders right now at this very moment, I think is a mistake. Like, for a couple of things. One is Carson Wentz needs to show the fact that he's not the 2020 guy that he was. I mean, that we all last saw. Like, if you say you're only as good as your last game, well, Carson Wentz got benched in his last game. It's not very good. So we need to see that guy that was at least in 2019, if not 2017. Phillip Rivers had a really good year. For him to get to even Phillip Rivers level is a huge turnaround for Carson Wentz. Not saying he can't do it. That's a huge turnaround for Carson Wentz. So then you get, you get Phillip Rivers level of play. Just say you get that. Phillip Rivers threw for 300 yards, 2 touchdowns in a playoff game against the Bills. Was excellent in that game, and they still lost. Why? They didn't have a pass rush. They couldn't really stop Josh Allen. And again, we saw what happened in the Super Bowl. How did the Bucs beat? Bucs beat the Chiefs. It wasn't Tom Brady outdoing Mahomes. Brady played a great game, but they had Mahomes on the run the entire game. I mean, is that what you were going to say? Sorry, I didn't mean to.
I was mentioning the front seven. That's where you got to build the team around. That's what Chris Ballard has worked towards. Yeah, exactly. So to me but right now, Justin Houston and Danico Autry accounted for I think it was almost 16 sacks last year. Yeah. They're both free agents. Al-Qadim Muhammad played almost 600 snaps at defensive end, also a free agent. Anthony Walker was a very valuable linebacker, free agent. Xavier Rhodes, their best corner, free agent. They don't have a left tackle right now because Anthony Costanzo retired. They got to figure that out. They don't have a kind of a move tight end right now because Trey Burton's a free agent. They got to figure that out. Is T.Y. Hilton coming back? And if he's not, do you trust Pittman and Campbell to lead your receiving core? Like, they have a lot of draft assets. They have a lot of resource in terms of cap space. But let's let it play out first. Let's see how they fill all these holes before we start calling them Super Bowl contenders. The truth is, the Chiefs are 2-time AFC champions at this point. So that's where it goes through. But if you look at the rest of the playoff teams, the last times the Colts played the Bills, they lost. Last time they played the Browns, they lost. Last time they played the Ravens, they lost. Last time they played the Steelers, they lost. Last time they played the Titans, they lost. So they have a long way to go to be Super Bowl contenders. Not saying they can't get there, but we got to be realistic about it. Yeah, but you mentioned the window is just opening. The Colts are definitely one of the teams to look out for in free agency in the draft that can make that jump up until from the contender to the favorites in the AFC. Yeah. Moving off the Colts for a little bit. Before you're the Colts insider, you did a lot of work covering motorsports and the Indy 500. How does the energy and atmosphere at something like the Indy 500 compare to other sports that you've covered?
Indy 500 is the most unique beast of anything I've ever been to ever. I don't know. Have you been?
I haven't.
Okay. I got to tell you to go. A fan covering it, whatever you can do. You're never going to be in your life in a place with 300,000 people at the same time. Like, that's insanity. Like, to be in a place with 300,000 people, like college football games, you talk about Michigan, that's 112,000, I think is when Ann Arbor, 110. So that's 3 times that. Think about that. I mean, that is insanity. And again, it's all spread out because it's over miles and miles because, that's the racetrack, but it's like, is nowhere you can walk without seeing thousands of people, and the noise when the race actually starts, it's incredible. And they have this tradition. They have these, the whole pre-race tradition. But Back Home Again in Indiana is the song that is sung before every race, and it is just like you can see everybody gets quiet, then everybody starts crying because it's a very emotional song, and then like the cheers that rise after the song is finished. Like I'm telling you, I'm getting chills just thinking about it right now. It is one of the most incredible feelings in sports. And again, like IndyCar doesn't have this huge following. It's a niche sport. It really is. But the Indy 500, it transcends everything. It's an incredible, incredible thing. Again, I actually haven't covered a Super Bowl, so I wish I could compare it to that. I want to. I was actually going to hope to cover this year, but then COVID, so big, different thing. But like I said, it's it's really hard to describe. Like I said, it's one of the most unique things. And then the race itself is just phenomenal. It feels like it's a 3-hour race that feels like it flies by in about 15 minutes. But the pre, I mean, it's one of the only things that has a month long buildup to one race. It starts like right in the beginning of May, and then it's on Memorial Day weekend. And there's practices and practices and practices and qualifying and bump day where, some teams who think they have a chance to win the 500 don't even get a chance to be in it. I mean, there's so much emotion poured into those weeks. Some teams and drivers, they only care about the 500 because it is the most glamorous thing in almost all of racing, really, aside from some of the stuff in F1. But anyway, like I said, I know there's probably not a lot of huge racing fans, especially IndyCar, but Indy 500, I will highly recommend. Just go as a fan, cover it, whatever, because it's one of the coolest experiences in sports.
When we get to the stage in the world where we can get back to 300,000 people, I'll make the 5-hour journey.
Yeah.
The 5-hour journey east because that just, the way you explain it, it was literally giving me chills, and I've never even been to the Indy 500. Just the experience, that's probably wild. As you mentioned, it's a 5-hour trip because where I am right now is University of Missouri. Your alum, the place that you went to college. Talk about some of your experiences here at Mizzou and how it helped your future career.
So yeah, I didn't start there. I actually went to.
Oh, okay.
I was a transfer student, so I actually went to community college for a couple of years and then transferred to Missouri. So that was like a whirlwind in itself, just kind of getting there. And when you get to, I mean, I don't know there's the journalism community in Missouri is like its own world, really. And to jump into it in the middle, it was like very interesting. I always wanted to cover sports. That's what I wanted to do, but I didn't know anybody. I didn't really know what was going on. So I joined the Missourian, but I covered education right away. And that was the first thing I did at the Missourian. And I worked with Elizabeth Brixey, who I think is still there and is one of my all-time favorite people. And I will say this, like getting that experience covering something other than sports, learning how to do something that was outside of my purview was incredibly beneficial. And working with Liz was also the perfect editor for me because I was kind of new at journalism, where I think a lot of people, they work at the Man Eater or they had spent a lot of time doing it in high school. I was kind of new. I came to journalism kind of late in my life. I didn't think that's what I wanted to do originally, and then kind of got to it at community college and thought, oh, this is something that I actually really enjoy. So, but Liz was like, she was the kind of person that she was nurturing, I guess is the best way to say it. Like I made a lot of rookie mistakes, we'll say it that way. And she was able to go, okay, you don't do it this way, you write it this way. And there's a lot of different things. Like, I think she saw that I had some talent, but was kind of unrefined. And so she helped kind of refine me, I guess. So that was huge. But I'll say like the Missourian and Missouri in general, I don't think I am where I am today without it. It's an invaluable experience. I mean, just throwing you in to a real newsroom and to a real and to covering things that people in the community care about. I remember covering education stories and getting calls from parents and being mad at me about stories I wrote or being happy about stories I wrote. And I'm, 19, 20. Cause like I said, I was like, oh God, I'm sorry. I didn't, again, you're playing with live ammo and it's great. It's a perfect time to learn. Like they understand that you're learning, but they want the coverage that they expect when they pay for a newspaper. So, I thought that was hugely valuable to me. I wasn't in shell shock when I got to the Indianapolis Star and joined a newsroom and for the first time and understood how the whole thing worked. Like I just think that the way Missouri does it is, again, I didn't go to a lot of other colleges, but I can say the way they do it, I think prepares you better for the real world than a lot of the people that I've encountered in my life and say, where did you go to college? And they have the college newspapers and they have some other stuff, but college newspaper is so much different experience to me than Missourian was. And it was such a hugely important thing for me.
Yeah, I can totally relate to you when getting Twitter DMs from parents asking me to film their high school game or whatever if we're doing work for KUMU8. The next thing, the Missouri football team, 2020. I know you've been following them. What were your thoughts on Elijah Drinkwitz's first year?
I can't say I did follow much, honestly. I know. I'm sorry. I'm a bad alum when it comes to watching Missouri football. And actually, funny enough, the guy I work with, Joel Erickson, is also a Mizzou alum and follows the Missouri football team all the time. So he has to ask me about it. I'm like, Joel, I didn't watch the game. I'm really sorry. So like I said, I feel bad. I'm a bad alum when it comes to watching Missouri football. I'm a bad alum when it comes to college football, though. Like I don't watch college football as much as I probably should. This is the time of the year where I start digging into tape and watching a bunch of guys because they're going to the NFL.
The draft.
The draft and stuff. But for some reason, and again, I shouldn't be confessing this, but college football has never hooked me in the way that I expected it would.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a huge sports fan. I really am. Like I said, I watch
Wow.
everything, but college football for me it's just not, maybe this sounds like snobby, but when I watch a sport, I like watching the best of the best. And I want to watch the NFL, and I want to watch the NBA, and I want to watch MLB. Like, again, I loved covering what I did cover in college, but like, it was always my goal to cover professional sports because that was, again, I like watching the best of the best. But again, super snobby answer, and I feel terrible about it. It's not like I don't like college sports. Like I said, I can't give you a good answer. I feel bad. I'm a bad alum, but anything I would say about Mizzou football in 2020 would be just making up. So I'm going to be being honest with you.
It's probably a good thing that you're missing some Missouri Tigers basketball in the spring. They've lost, I think, 4 of their last 5, including a pretty bad loss the day before we're recording this to Ole Miss at home. I've been fortunate enough to go to Indy a couple times.
Okay.
I went to the Bengals game this past year. I was able to hit up St. Elmo's Steakhouse. I know
Nice.
you do a lot of traveling. Where do you put St. Elmo's amongst places you've been around the country?
Well, I'll say this: like St. Elmo's is incredible, first of all,
Unbelievable.
But I don't like when I travel. I don't go to places like St. Elmo's very often. It's expensive. So like I said, I don't go huge, but like I said, St. Elmo's is incredible. I would highly recommend it. Though, like I said, I've been a few times and it's been awesome. It's actually a great time to go during like the combine. Again, we're missing out, and this is the time of the year where we normally have the combine, and the city is just hopping with agents and players and coaches and GMs, and it's just an awesome time to go to St. Elmo's or anywhere else in the city. It's like I did it for the first time last year covering the combine, and it was incredible. And I'm going to miss it this year because we don't have it, but I'm trying to think some of my travels. Where are my favorite? I mean, I'm a sucker for Mexican food. So anywhere you give me to Texas, and I'm gonna just like, what's that?
Chipotle, is that falling?
No. Authentic Mexican, man. Okay. Authentic Mexican. So like Texas is the place to be for that. Like Texas, California, you can do some of that. Like Long Beach, when I covered IndyCar, there's a street race, which is another thing that I would recommend to even people who are not fans of racing. A street race IndyCar. It's actually when they actually race on the streets of the city that they're in. They do it in Long Beach. They're going to do it in Nashville this year. They do it in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's awesome. It's like a 3-day party. It's just a 3-day party. People are hanging out outside. There's cars racing around. It's awesome. There's incredible food. So yeah, Long Beach is like, if you're into cars at all, Long Beach is the race to go. But even if you're just into partying and having a good time and then watching a little bit of racing, Long Beach. But some of the best places for food, I would say Texas, Long Beach. I'm trying to think of some other spots that I really enjoyed. Man. Now those are the two. Like there's again, in Texas, you get incredibly authentic Mexican, and you get like some of the best barbecue in the world.
Well, so they say the best barbecue is in Kansas City.
It is. It's actually Kansas City, great barbecue. Went out. We covered was it Thursday night? It was a Thursday night Chiefs Colts game. Not this past season, but 2 seasons ago. Incredible food there. I got a few friends in Kansas City, so that was like got to go out with them, and actually an underrated town, I would say. I don't know what you think.
I went to a Chiefs game this year. I haven't been deep into the city of Kansas City, but I'm told the barbecue is great.
It's incredible.
Some of the architecture they have there is awesome. Whenever we're ending a podcast talking about food, there's probably a good podcast. I also mentioned Chipotle because there's the Chipotle right next to the journalism school, if you don't remember.
Yeah.
So basically every time that you're leaving there, you basically, in the afternoon, you have to hit it up. Thank you, Jim, for Ayello, for coming on the podcast, talking all things Colts, IndyCar, more Colts, food most importantly.
Yeah.
Jim, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This was blessed.
Another big thank you to Jim Ayello of the IndyStar for coming on the podcast, talking all things Colts, Carson Wentz, his time at Missouri, and a lot more. So follow Jim at the IndyStar. He's got a lot of good Colts content coming out. And keep following us at the Harrison Vapnek Podcast. We have on the 2019 Jim Nantz Award winner, Drew Carter. He's a CBS 42 reporter down in Birmingham. Going to be talking a lot of Alabama football, his career at Syracuse, now in Alabama. So a lot of fun stuff with Drew Carter coming in the next few days, so stay tuned for that. And as always, have a great day, and we'll see you on the Harrison Vapnek Podcast. See ya!